On April 30th, 1555, as the dawn broke over London, so too did the news that Queen Mary I had given birth to a son, with little pain and no danger. Bells started ringing. People hurried to church, leaving their businesses unattended for the day, before setting up impromptu celebrations in the streets, with tables of food and wine. Bonfires crackled as people toasted to the Tudor succession and thanked God for the safe arrival of England's future king. But while this happy news was making its way across Europe, things were not being celebrated at Hampton Court. Mary I was continuing her confinement, just as she had been the previous day, on April 29th. In fact, she remained exactly as she had been for months now, near a nursery, complete with wet nurses and royal rockers. Her half-sister, Elizabeth, was at hand to witness the birth, having been summoned from house arrest at Woodstock. A beautiful trimmed cradle was made ready, which included the Latin translation, "The child which thou to Mary, O Lord of might, hast sent, to England's joy, in health preserve, keep and defend." Also nearby were letters that had been pre-written and signed by Mary announcing the birth, with the appropriate dates and gender to be added as final details. But as dusk fell, with parties continuing into the night, the cradle remained empty, and those letters were never sent. Those who had announced Mary I had birthed a son with little pain and no danger were mistaken. There was no baby, and although Mary had been spared the agony of childbirth, we can assume today that there was a great deal of mental and perhaps physical pain for her, and an increased sense of danger as her world seemed to collapse around her. In Mary Tudor, England's first queen, Professor Anna Whitelock recounts how, within hours of Mary's death, the preparation of her body began. Her heart and bowels were removed, her belly opened and filled with herbs and spices. It's impossible for us to say with any certainty what was going on within the Queen's womb, and no modern exhumation of her remains could shed any further light today. But if we were able to access the physical evidence, as it had been at her death in 1557, we would likely determine not only her cause of death, but whether it was medically linked to the infamous phantom pregnancies Mary is said to have experienced. What we do know of her condition leads to several theories, and all of them are unfortunate. Re-examining the events with a better regard for mental health today means that Mary's case can surely pluck a degree of sympathy from anyone, regardless of her more notorious or bloody reputation. First, let us give credit to the idea that Mary was indeed pregnant in 1555, but that the fetus simply did not survive. There is, however, no evidence of this, and we cannot know why it would be kept a secret so successfully, when plenty of people would have known about it. Enough rumours abounded at the time that a fictitious child had been conceived within the Queen's own mind. Why would there be no mention of a miscarriage or stillbirth? In correspondence between Mary's husband, King Philip II, and Maximilian of Austria, the king himself voices doubt over the child's existence. He writes, "The Queen's pregnancy turns out not to have been as certain as we thought. Your Highness and my sister manage better than we do." It seems a cynical and insensitive thing to disclose to his brother-in-law if a genuine pregnancy had resulted in a miscarriage or stillbirth. Some speculate that Mary, having either miscarried during the first trimester or never been with child at all, had simply kept the pretense of a healthy pregnancy going, as a facade to keep her husband close by and retain her subject's sense of hope. But as with other theories, it offers doubt. Mary would have known how impractical such a ruse would be. When no baby emerged, the gig would inevitably be up, and embarrassment would follow. not just within her marriage, but the whole country. Mary's humiliation was certainly genuine, and only exacerbated by the joy she had eagerly shared with others, including her father-in-law, Charles V. "As for that child which I carry in my belly," Mary had written the previous December, "I declare it to be alive, and with great humility thank God for his great goodness shown to me, praying him so to guide the fruit of my womb, that it may contribute to his glory and honour." Another person with whom Mary had shared her happiness was Cardinal Reginald Pole. He had delighted Mary upon his arrival at Whitehall in November, reciting the Ave Maria, "Hail thou art highly favoured, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women," words the angel Gabriel had spoken to the Virgin Mary at the conception of Jesus. In Mary Tudor, England's first queen, Anna Whitelock observes that Pole's greeting was, it seems, equally prophetic. Shortly after he left, Mary sent a messenger after him. She had felt her baby child stir when Pole had greeted her. To flatter the cardinal with news the baby had moved in his presence is quite a fabrication for such a devoutly religious woman. Surely Mary would have felt a shred of guilt if she knew herself not to be pregnant, and therefore unworthy of such attention. Another thing to consider is the fact that Mary's half-sister, and next in the succession, Elizabeth, would have been a first-hand witness to the whole degrading episode, and it's doubtful Mary would have wanted her rival to see her fail at keeping the throne away from her. Many suggest the desire to keep Elizabeth from returning England to Protestantism only fueled Mary's desire to believe her pregnancy was real and a healthy one. When Mary finally left her confinement in August, she offered no announcement or explanation of the matter, perhaps as a further means to save face and avoid mockery. She had been presumed pregnant for around 11 months at this time, and perhaps she had been clinging desperately for hope, whilst also dreading the inevitable shame of her public error. It would not be a singular occurrence in Mary's life either. She would experience another phantom pregnancy before her death. So far, these theories have presented Mary as either a deluded or deceitful individual. But what about her physicians? Had they not confirmed the Queen to have been with child? Had she not stood at the palace window on St. George's Day and presented her large belly side on for her subjects to admire? In her book, Children of England, the historian Alison Weir writes how, during the previous September, Mary's doctors confirmed that she was pregnant. She had all the usual symptoms. Her periods had ceased, her breasts and abdomen had swollen, and she suffered from nausea in the morning. Even though Mary, an anointed queen, would most likely have foregone an internal examination, did she not exhibit enough signs to make her pregnancy undeniable? No, not necessarily, especially when we consider the symptoms that go hand in hand with other medical conditions Mary could have had. In 2000, Dr. Milo Keynes published The Aching Head and Increasing Blindness of Queen Mary I, and stated that it is possible to show that Queen Mary suffered from a tumour of the pituitary endocrine gland. Researching into the symptoms of such a tumour paints a rather grim picture of Mary's condition. Of the symptoms listed, the Queen is known to have exhibited many examples of hormonal deficiencies throughout her lifetime, including headaches, vision loss, nausea and vomiting, less frequent or no menstrual periods, unintended weight loss or gain. The growth of such tumours may be accountable for the sensation of pregnancy, especially the pressure they would put on other parts of her reproductive organs. It would explain her fluctuating weight, with her belly growing so large to suggest an imminent birth at one time, to being able to sit with her knees up to her chin, something a heavily pregnant woman could not do comfortably, at another time. Other theories have been discredited by the historian Linda Porter. She writes in her book, Mary Tudor, the First Queen, "We can probably discount the lurid and malicious stories put about by the Venetians that Mary had evacuated a mole, a shapeless lump of flesh, which is a rare occurrence that can happen." Alison Weir elaborates on this and how a hydatidiform mole would have occurred. She explains it is a condition of pregnancy caused by chromosomal irregularity, where the placenta develops into a benign tumour resembling a bunch of grapes, and deprives the growing embryo of nourishment. The embryo dies, but the mole continues to grow. The woman's abdomen swells as in pregnancy. Eventually, her body expels the mole. Weir presents the mole theory in a very compelling way that certainly makes us think that we must have the answer, validating a genuine pregnancy and loss of a fetus. But she also has her own doubts about this theory, because it would have brought with it a heavy amount of bleeding, as the mole was expelled, which Mary is not known to have had. So both historians have placed this theory aside in favour of others. Linda Porter also reasons it's unlikely that Mary had ovarian cancer. Mary lived a further 3 years, albeit in delicate health, and ovarian cancer would have likely accelerated her death far sooner. Porter does not dismiss Dr. Keynes' suggestions of a tumour of the pituitary gland. She merely points out that an autopsy would be required for us to ever know for sure. She concludes that the most likely explanation, in her opinion, remains a phantom pregnancy, and that is sad enough in itself. Most people seem happy to accept that Mary simply suffered from pseudocyesis, the clinical term for phantom pregnancy. Such a phenomenon is characterized by all of the typical pregnancy symptoms, such as weight gain, expanding belly, sickness, irritability, and backache, except there is no baby to begin with. The American Pregnancy Association provides an interesting overview of the condition, writing that, contrary to what many people believe, false pregnancy is not only found in women, but in men as well. When a man suffers a false pregnancy, it is usually called sympathetic pregnancy. This is an interesting takeaway when we attempt to draw a link between Mary's mental health and this episode in her life. Pseudocyesis is also thought to be connected with ovarian tumours, which of course helps to validate some of the other theories we've discussed. Whatever the reason, the effect these phantom pregnancies had on Mary's mental state was devastating. Phantom pregnancies were recognised as a somewhat common medical condition in the Tudor era, but Mary seems to have truly believed that she had not only conceived a child, but had carried it to term. In the absence of modern medicine, Mary seems to have looked beyond any suggestion of pseudocyesis and decided that her misfortune was an act of divine retribution, believing that the loss of an heir must have been her own wretched fault, and a just punishment from God for not dealing with the heretics of her realm properly. In her attempts to repent, hundreds would suffer and die. Mary would cement her legacy with such brutality that it's easy for us to lose sight of the genuine tragedy that was her life. What do you think about Mary's phantom pregnancies? Do you have a theory that hasn't been discussed here? Share your thoughts below, and I'd love to hear them.